Well, hello. Today on Education Secrets, we'll learn about admissions and competitive colleges, and we'll hear from the personal experience of a mom whose three kids got accepted at America's top universities, including Harvard. So I'd like to introduce Renee Bookout, college admissions advisor, founder of the Academic Center for Testing in Florida, and mom of three college graduates.
Thank you so much for having me on the program. It's a pleasure.
So, Renee, you as a mom of three kids who've already are in college or graduated college, I'd love to hear your personal story. So your son graduated from Harvard and your daughters attended Vanderbilt and Wake Forest. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey as a parent and how you supported your kids in terms of succeeding at school and developing their talents?
Sure. So I grew up in Michigan, which is known for having a very good school district. I attended the University of Michigan, where I met my husband. The Navy brought us to Pensacola, Florida, and we made education really our number one decision when we got out of the military, where we were going to raise our children. And we wanted a school system that really supported the children and that was inviting to the families, because I believe and have always believed that parental involvement in their children is critically important. I have teachers in my family. I have a sister, two brother-in-laws. They do an excellent job, but I believe the role of the parent is critically important. From a very young age, we read to our children. We started out, they got one book based on their age. And trust me, when they started to hit 5, 6, and 7, and you put them to bed at night, it took a long time. But I'm a firm believer that reading to children, vocabulary is instrumental to their growth as human beings and to their educational drive. It opens so many doors for them. My middle one, my son, whom you mentioned, became a voracious reader. And in fact, when some of his peers and younger students would ask him, "How did you get into Harvard?" he said, "I read." And I think that, my work that I do at the Academic Center for Testing has proved that the strongest readers are, in fact, the best test takers. Fast forward to 10 years ago, when my oldest was applying to colleges and I knew nothing about the process. When I applied for colleges, I sharpened a pencil to take the ACT. That was about the extent of it. But we made a lot of mistakes. And the good news for your elementary, middle school, even some of your high school parents who are tuning in, you're way ahead of where I was. And really, knowledge is power. And that's what I learned in this process. And I vowed to learn everything I could learn to help my next two, which, the landscape had changed tremendously from when I had gone through the process to even when my first, second, and then my third went through the process. But one of the things I really tried to emphasize for my children and for the children that I work with is to follow your passion, whatever it is. Don't build a resume. Follow your passion and your resume will follow. And I think that that served all three of my children very well. They all had different strengths, different weaknesses. But by doing what they enjoyed, what they loved, that came through in their applications. That came through in the work that they did, the community service that they did. And I think that made them better human beings and I guess better candidates for the colleges as well.
Well, can you give us a little bit more details and more tips in terms of you have three, I'm sure three different kids with three different strengths, three different interests, three different talents. How did you manage to, first of all, see those talents and nurture them? You talked a lot about reading, of course, and that's very early grades. What were you doing towards the end of elementary school, in middle school with your children?
So even during middle school, when my children would have reading assignments, I love to read and I wanted to foster in them that continued love of reading. And so we would do a book club, and whatever they were reading for their middle school class, I would try to read along with them. And then we'd have a discussion because I recognized that, each of my children learned differently as well. Some were kinesthetic learners, some might have been visual or auditory learners. And so what I tried to do was, make tools available to them that played to those strengths. So one of the things that I always encourage families to try to do, and children outgrow or they grow into or out of different ways of learning, but try to identify, and there are great tools that are available out there, try to identify how does your child learn? Is your child, a visual learner, in which case, flashcards are fabulous. Is your child a kinesthetic learner, in which case, don't try to tie them to a chair. Let them walk around the room. Maybe they have to have that music playing in the background. So I think as parents, if we can help our children identify how they learn best, and then we work with them on those skill sets, to develop both their own learning tools, but also maybe to expand those learning tools through reading clubs with them, through doing flashcards with them, to introducing them to things that they might not otherwise be introduced to in the classroom. One of my favorite things to do with my children when they were in elementary and middle school was take science into the kitchen, and we would cook. And I had them measuring. I had them, let's try adding more of this instead of less of this and see what would happen, and allowing them to fail. And I think that's very important, whether that's in the kitchen, in life, in the classroom. We learn more from our failures, as we all know, than we do from our successes. And I think failing in a safe environment where, they've got that nest to fall back on, they've got a soft place to land in mom or dad's lap, is really important. And so I challenged them in the kitchen to fail. I challenged them, in their outdoor activities. If they weren't comfortable playing soccer, we weren't going to give it up. We were just going to do the best we could, get through the season, maybe shift gears, after the season, but learn something from it, whether that was just how to be a good teammate and sit on the sidelines.
That's a great point, and you gave us so many great points. But yes, I hear a lot of parents saying that, oh, well, my child tried it and they didn't like it. So you're saying it wouldn't be so easy in your family. They'd have to complete essentially what they've taken on.
So our rule was, if you make a commitment, you make a commitment for that season. And so if they were playing a sport, they were going to play. And sometimes they weren't playing. Sometimes they were sitting on the sidelines, and that was okay too. They learned, as I said, to become a good team player, to support their teammates. Um, I can't say they didn't quit things. I mean, I started them all out with piano lessons. None of them continued with it. To this day, my son says to me, "Why didn't you make me continue with piano?" But I wasn't going to force them. I made them do it for the season, and give it a try. Lots of different things, whether that was athletics, something academically related. We were fortunate in that all three of our children, and I think this again grew from a passion that my husband and I share, which is history. And we encouraged all three of them to get involved in middle school with History Fair, National History Day. One of the best programs that exists in our country, I believe. It developed their research skills. It developed their public speaking skills at a young age. It developed, their ability to write and to do the hard work that has to be done, whether that's through history fair or science fair. And what we would do is we took opportunities every time we traveled. We took a vacation, but we always tried to incorporate something. I wouldn't call it academic, but I would call it intellectual into the
Mm.
experience. Even if we were going on a ski trip, I wanted to find a museum and learn about, the people that developed that area, or what brought people to those mountains. And, I think that living history, which is what you do when you do have those experiences, really how children and we as adults learn, and we synthesize, and I think we store that information a lot better. So on every trip we took, and oftentimes it was even on a Segway, where it wasn't like, oh, here we go, we're going through Gettysburg and we're going to learn about, no, we were riding Segways through Gettysburg when they were old enough to do that. So it had a fun component, but it had an educational component as well. And some of those are our best memories, but I think they also developed in my children a thirst for knowledge beyond what was in a textbook. And I think that's part of our role as parents, is to expose our children as best we can to those opportunities when we're fortunate to be able to do it, to help them see beyond their textbooks, to see beyond what's in front of them, and to want to venture out to learn more, whether that's in their city, in their state, in their country, or worldwide, and make us global citizens, which is fortunately what a lot of technology is allowing us to do better.
Absolutely. Well, you've been in college admissions, well, as a college admissions advisor for now over a decade. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yes. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of change as well over just this past decade when it comes to college admissions. Could you tell us what trends you're seeing today? What do you think are the key factors when it comes to college admissions?
So that's a great question because it is ever changing. You know, my background is I'm an attorney and I practiced tax law for a number of years, which is very specialized, and it's the kind of thing that you can't just jump in and out of. And I've learned that that is so true in college admissions as well. Just when you think you're comfortable, just when you think you've got some of the answers. I'll never have all of the answers, and every time I think I do, you know, the puzzle is changing and I've got to find a few more pieces to try to figure this out. But some of the trends that I'm seeing, certainly the same thing that folks are reading about. You know, a lot of people questioning in the wake of COVID. I'm not sure we're quite in the wake, but in the days of COVID, about standardized testing, about ACT and SAT. But the colleges still need something to be able to compare students. And I think what I've seen elevate to be one of the great American equalizers are AP test scores and the rigor of a student's course selection. And I've seen a lot more emphasis on those AP test scores, on their you know, how they've done in their classes, and did they challenge themselves. And I think what a lot of people want to focus on a GPA or a class rank, which is very important. There's no doubt about it. But we've also seen the trend where a good number of high schools aren't even ranking students. And I tell students, you know, if you're passionate about something, it's okay if it's not a weighted class. If we're developing other skill sets, student government, developing leadership, don't be afraid to try things that are new to you. And honestly, if you're getting an A in a class, step up to the next level. That's what the colleges want to see. They want to see that you're not sitting in your comfort zone, that you're taking yourself outside of your comfort zone. One of the other big changes I've seen, which is very encouraging, is an increased emphasis on community service. And I think that the colleges have recognized that students who are engaged in their school and in their community become engaged college students. And engaged college students become engaged alumni. And if we want to be as cynical as to say engaged alumni make great donors, we can take it even that far. But I think they're not just looking for what can we as a college give you, but what can you bring to us? And so I think community service is something that, you know, really has taken on increased importance in the college admissions process, because the days have arrived, quite frankly, where we're seeing more students who prepare for these standardized tests, whether they remain a factor or not. And so we're seeing more students with perfect or near perfect scores. And so they've got to find something else, you know, and that's where rigor comes in, you know, and that's where I think community service and your extracurriculars come in. And again, going and talking back to my elementary and middle school parents, that's where we start. That's really where we start, you know, growing in our children a love to serve others, growing that servant leadership. And I encourage parents, if you're involved in any charity, any charitable organization, try to involve your child, even if that's just talking about what it is that you're doing at the dinner table. If you can take them with you, all the better. If you're not involved, I challenge you to get involved. And I challenge you to find ways that, you know, you can, on Thanksgiving morning, you can go and hand out food to the homeless. You know, whatever it is from a young age, you can help your children see what is happening in their own community and that they can be part of what makes a difference. Because I think, you know, as we grow these children into adults, it's much better than seeing them all of a sudden in junior year wake up and say, "Oh, I need community service." That's just too transparent. Versus,
Yeah.
you know, really demonstrating a heart of service from a very young age and becoming passionate about what you're doing. And I like to tell my students as young as 8th grade, when I start seeing many of them, you know, I'd love for you to cure COVID, but you don't have to cure COVID. Whatever it is you are passionate about, let's find a way for you to give back doing what you love. So, for example, my oldest loved to babysit. So she started a program called Babysitting to Better Lives when she was in high school. And every time she babysat, she took a portion of her proceeds and she sponsored children at an orphanage in India. And she got more involved with this orphanage, and she did fundraising videos for them, and for 4 years she was very devoted and remains devoted to helping young children, to helping people who weren't born into the opportunities that she has had. My third one loved to wrap Christmas gifts. Every year between Thanksgiving and Christmas, she did a gift wrap service for busy moms and dads. They dropped off their gifts, she would wrap them, bows, tags. All she asked for was a check to their favorite charity. She raised
Wow.
thousands of dollars for charity wrapping Christmas gifts. So, again, you don't have to found an organization necessarily, I tell families. You don't have to, join every club. Whatever it is you're passionate about. I have piano students who are playing in nursing homes and getting community service hours to practice the piano. And it's a beautiful thing.
I think what you're emphasizing also that a lot of people viewed community service before as, okay, I do some hours through some club at my school, and it's just this generic community service. But you're really saying how to connect that community service to something, that's a long-term commitment or a passion or an interest. So it makes it more meaningful rather than, okay, I'll just complete my 100 hours of community service through whatever, 1 year or high school years.
And it seems a long way off, but you, as parents of elementary and middle school students, are going to blink. And these students are going to be sitting down to fill out their applications, to write their essays. And it's hard to write a 650-word essay about picking up trash on a Saturday morning and doing another service project for 3 hours here or 3 hours there. What I want is I want it to tell part of their story. Here's what I did. I played soccer, and here's what I learned from playing soccer. I became a better leader. I became a better teammate. I learned time management skills. I won these awards and went to these tournaments. But better yet, here's what I gave back. I then started coaching a young elementary school team, and I became a role model for those younger students. So, again, sharing their passion, whether that's in a sport or in the sciences or, a babysitting, whatever it may be. But you're exactly right. It's figuring out what you're passionate about and then finding a way to give back through that passion, because that comes through in the essays, and it also, quite frankly, often helps to get a letter of recommendation, which is a very important part of the application process. Get a great letter of recommendation from someone you've worked with.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you another question about the trends right now. So it seems there's a lot of discussion that competitive colleges today are actually looking for students that are more angular or lopsided rather than what we used to hear before, the well-rounded student. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and it almost is as if you've read the notes when I sit down with my families, because one of the things that I say to them is, you're going to go on these tours and you may hear the colleges say, we're looking for well-rounded students. Well, they're lying, I tell them, and they're not lying. What they're really, I think, talking about is exactly what you've alluded to, and that is they're looking for a well-rounded class. They don't need everybody coming in wanting to study the same thing, having had the same experiences with the same GPA and class rank. So I like to liken it to thinking about different buckets that the colleges are looking to fill. And some of those buckets are things that I want my students working on, quite frankly, starting in middle school. What is your academic interest? This is another trend that I've really seen over the last couple of years. When my first two applied to colleges, they both applied undecided. They didn't know where they wanted to go. They didn't know what they wanted to study. And I tell my students I work with, I'm in my mid 50s and I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So it's okay. I just read an article that said that students today graduating in the next couple of years will have had 18 different jobs, nine of which haven't even been invented. But the trend I've seen is they prefer you to have some sense of what you want to do, because that's one of their buckets, academic interests. They can't have everybody coming in pre-med, pre-law, wanting to be a teacher, although I wish there were more of those, wanting to do this or that. They've got certain buckets they need to fill. So academic interest is one of them. Another one is GPA and class rank. but that's only one bucket. I tell students when that bucket's full, they don't need any more of those kids. That's why students with perfect GPAs and perfect test scores don't get into every school. One of the buckets that I believe is totally within a student's control is their extracurricular activities and their leadership. Things that we've been talking about already. It's not just, are you captain of this? Are you president of that? I look at leadership as, where did you take some initiative in your life? Where did you maybe go and look for a summer program that was going to expose you to something you wouldn't otherwise get exposure to? Where did you maybe challenge yourself because your school didn't offer history fair, but you did it yourself? You went and did that project anyway because you have an interest in history. um, where did you take some initiative with community service? So that's another big bucket that they're looking at. Then there's geographic diversity. We all know that that can play in, depending on where you live. If you're living in California, it may be that schools on the East Coast need more of you or fewer of you, or more kids from Alaska or Hawaii. We know that socioeconomic diversity makes a difference. We know that, race can make a difference in the process. So these are just some of the different buckets that the colleges are looking to fill that I believe students want to be aware of, families want to be aware of as they navigate through this process, starting as early as middle school. Which ones are the buckets that play to your strengths? Which ones are the ones we can continue to work on? Obviously, some completely, not within their control. Ethnic diversity, they can't change that at this point. Socioeconomic diversity, maybe or maybe not. Geographic diversity, maybe or maybe not. But certainly there are enough other things. One other bucket is competition winners. Colleges, do like to see that students have won some awards, and that's not always just academic. It can be athletic, it can be scholarships early as applying in middle school for some scholarships. Again, putting yourself out there for those speech contests, those spelling bees, those kind of things, joining your honor societies and getting involved. So I would say those are the main buckets that I talk to my students about, that when we talk about a trend, the trend seems to be away from that well rounded student and more looking perhaps at, you know, the gifts that that student may bring to their school. Anecdotally, I will share with you, when my son started at Harvard, I got a phone call from him, probably the first week or two, and he said, "Mom, I don't know what I'm doing here. Everybody here is smarter than I am. They're all, first in their first at doing this, national skiers, national, and he said, I really don't know what I'm doing here." And I said to him, "You know what, Nick? They saw something in you, and here's the lesson. Learn from them. You don't have to be the best, but you can learn from the best." So and he took that to heart, I think, and surrounded himself with, kids who were brilliant in math, and they helped him with his statistics. A friend of his who was a nationally ranked downhill skier, and he took him skiing, and he learned a lot from his peers. And I think that's a critically important part of growing up, quite frankly. And it doesn't have to start in college. Take those opportunities to recognize your weaknesses too in middle school, but then surround yourself with students who are good at something that you could become better at, and ask them to share that knowledge. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask your teachers for help.
Absolutely. Well, can you share a little bit of what could be some of these specific buckets when it comes to extracurriculars or academic interest? And maybe you could share what you think those were for your children, what set them apart.
So I think that, as I said, each of my children had different strengths and weaknesses. I think for my first one, her big bucket was community service. She was an excellent student, not a real good test taker, quite frankly. She did well enough to, get recognized by a lot of really good schools, but not a perfect score. But she really poured her heart into her community service, and I think that was what attracted the schools. She had several schools that offered her full ride scholarships based on her community service. So I
Wow.
think that was sort of her big bucket, along with, she was a good, very, very good tennis player, had been to state a couple of times, and had some leadership roles in her high school, president of her National Honor Society, editor of her yearbook. So I think, for her, it
Wow.
was really sort of that leadership component. My middle one was a dual sport athlete, and I think that he did very well in both of his sports. Was captain of his football and his basketball team. But he was my really good test taker and became a national merit, which again he credits with reading, because there's a lot of vocabulary on the PSAT and the SAT, and that's quite frankly not something a tutor can teach you in a short amount of time. You gain that knowledge over extended periods of time by reading. So I think, for him, it was a combination. He was probably a little more well-rounded than my other children, and he was fortunate that at that time, I think colleges were true to their word that they were looking for well-rounded students. He seemed to have the academics, the athletics, and the leadership. And he did do community service, not to the same level that my first and my third, but he did his fair share. And then my third one was really a student leader. She was very involved in student government in middle school, got very involved in student government in high school. And she had the real passion for history fair. And I kind of sort of used her as an example in our discussion a little bit earlier. When she got to high school, she had done history fair in middle school. They didn't have it in high school, but she had set a goal in middle school to go to nationals, which her sister had done in high school, and she fell short in middle school. So when she got to high school, she decided she was going to keep following that path, and went back to her middle school teacher because the high school didn't do history fair, asked her if she would sponsor her, which she did, and she ended up with a project that took her all the way to nationals.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think they saw initiative in that. They saw that she had developed this passion for history, and she took that passion, and even when it wasn't necessarily available to her in the same way in high school, she found a way to make it available. And she fell short of hitting the national stage, which was the new goal she had set for herself once she got there. But she didn't stop then. Quite frankly, she found in the envelope from NHD an opportunity to apply to become a student ambassador at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And she applied for that and was very fortunate to be one of about a dozen students selected to interview World War II veterans around the country. And their interviews now play at the National History Day at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And she was invited to give a speech when they were opening a new section of the museum, and was up on the stage with generals and movie stars. And so I think what her skill set was, having developed through history fair those public speaking skills that allowed her to run for office in student government, to stand up in front of a crowd and give a speech, to do documentaries for history fair, was sort of the gift. And she went on to major in economics and history at Vanderbilt. So she carried that passion with her to college. And I think that's a little bit of what colleges are looking for too, is, as I said, it's not just what are we going to give you, but what are you going to bring to us?
It's a little bit like a job application in a way, right? I mean, it's when you show up for a job application, you should be able to show what are you going to deliver to that workplace. It's not just, well, tell me what to do and I'll just do it, right?
Right. Don't just let me pick up a paycheck and I'm just here. They want people who can think outside the box. And my middle one was a social studies major. And I mean, I grew up in the days of, my husband was pre-med, I was pre-law. We knew the path we were going to take. And when he came to us and said, I'm going to be a social studies major, I was like, what do social study majors do? And he said, I'm going to learn to think critically. And it worked. And that's what a lot of the employers were looking for is, they don't necessarily wanting you to come in and knowing all the answers. They want to be able to teach you different things. So that was really an interesting thing that he taught me as he went through this process.
So interesting. Well, what advice would you give to students, to parents who are really dreaming about, the Ivy League or those types of equivalent colleges, the most competitive colleges in the United States? What should they think about as early as elementary school and middle school and as they're approaching their high school years?
So again, I think it's some of the things we've talked about. It's obviously reading, developing a passion, exposing your child to things I think that they might not otherwise get exposed to, whether that's community service or, different countries, different museums, helping them learn to become uncomfortable. I think that's really important as well. I think as parents, we need to pay attention to very early on um, what's going to be considered as they move into high school. As they matriculate into high school, a lot of times, we don't necessarily realize that the grades and the scores that they earn in middle school will, in fact, dictate what opportunities may be available to their children in high school. They don't realize that that B in their math class may keep them out of the honors math in high school. So I think as parents, it behooves us to understand very early on in their middle school career, how are their middle school grades and test scores going to impact what opportunities they will have in high school? Because oftentimes I get students as they're ready to matriculate from middle school into high school, and they didn't realize that when they didn't score well on that end of course exam or when they got that B in a class, that was going to keep them out of AP Human Geography, or that was going to keep them out of another class that they were really, really interested in. So I think that's very important. I think challenging your student to take classes that they otherwise might not take because they've heard other kids say, oh, that's not a good teacher, or that teacher's too hard. Hard teachers teach us a lot. I mean, we're all going to work with difficult people in our life, and it's nice to learn those coping skills. I think as young children, it's very hard as a parent. I've been through it, I still live through it, to not want to bubble wrap our children and to make everything better for them and to step in when maybe it's better for them to learn how to have those discussions with their difficult teachers, with in difficult situations. It's hard to not do that as a parent, to step in, to not step in. But I think the more we can teach our children to stand up for themselves, to advocate for themselves, I think those are great tools for children to start to have as they, move into high school. I think that also anything you can be doing to help your child figure out what they're good at, what they like, whether that's summer camps or just having them have conversations with adults. What is it that you do? How did you get started in that job? What do you like about that job? What do you not like about that job? I think there are great resources, many of which weren't available for my first two who were undecided. I think there are great resources available for young children to really begin to explore on those iPads that they all love. What is it that I might be good at? Do I like trying to solve these puzzles? Do I like diving deeply into things, or do I like to color? And I just worked with a wonderful student who graduated from Vanderbilt with my daughter, who was an art major. And I'm sure her parents had that same thing go, you're going to be an art major? What are we going to do with that? Well, she's now a first year law student at Columbia, and
Hmm.
wants to carry that passion of art out into the world and maybe work for a Sotheby's or for, one of the auction companies as an attorney. So, really fostering in our children a love for what they enjoy doing and not trying to set a career path for it, right out of the gate. Just letting them develop that passion. The career will come. It will come, and it may come 17 or 18 different times. Who knows?
Exactly, as you had said, 17 or 18 times. And I liked your point very much about don't be afraid of the hard teachers. We learn so much from them. And I remember my high school years, and in fact, a class that was probably my least favorite was AP Physics. But I still remember the phrases the teacher would say, and I now tell them to my daughter. And the teacher would say, no units, no credit. So now when my daughter, she's in fifth grade and she's learning geometry, and I'm telling her, no units, no credit. So I laugh at myself because this is what I remember from decades ago, from probably at the time my least favorite class.
It's interesting. That brings up another really good point of what I think parents of young children can work on in elementary school and middle school, my gosh, even in preschool. Organizational skills. I think that is one of the biggest hurdles. Again, I think it comes back a little bit to us, and I'm just as guilty of coveting, of caring for, of wanting to ease some of the burdens for our children and packing their backpack for them and emptying their backpack for them and organizing their backpack for them. That's a skill they got to learn, because if they get to high school and that backpack is cluttered and they don't know what's due when, they don't keep an agenda book, um, I really find that can be one of their biggest hurdles to success in high school. I had a young boy I started working with actually in middle school. His mom was ready to pull out her hair. She wanted me to step in, and I was happy to be the bad guy. And he would show up to me at least 1 or 2 days a week, and she just wanted me to help him develop those organizational skills. And the first thing we do is dump that backpack. Why is this paper not in that folder? How are and so I think if you can teach your child some of those skills, a different color folder for each of the classes, sticky notes that mean this is homework that has to be done tonight, this is homework that has to be turned in tomorrow, keeping an agenda book. Even at a young age, our children are scheduled, sometimes overscheduled. Again, mine, I confess, were probably overscheduled at times, but you don't always see that until you write it down. And in today's technology age, we just don't take enough advantage, I think, of that old school tool of the visual seeing on a piece of paper what we've got coming up and realizing we haven't given ourselves enough time to decompress or to really be able to organize our thoughts and our papers and our life. And that's a big hurdle for a lot of my young students, especially those transitioning into middle school where they're going to have multiple teachers, and then moving into high school where it's no unit, no grade. There's not going to be somebody there saying, "Oh, okay, turn it in tomorrow." No, it's called zero if it didn't get turned in today. So, parents of young children, let them, again, if they're going to fail, let them fail in elementary and middle school. Let them experience that, zero because they didn't turn in that assignment because mom didn't put it in the backpack. The child didn't put it in the backpack. We'd rather they do it then than middle or high school.
Absolutely. Well, from your perspective, also as a founder of a tutoring center in Florida, in Gulf Breeze, I wanted to ask, what do you see as kind of the key personal or academic skills that parents need to instill in their kids in elementary school? And here we just discussed that one of them was organizational skills. I think that's one of the key personal skills, certainly. What do you think are some of the maybe academic skills or other personal skills that are missing and you'd like to see parents not make that mistake and instill that in elementary school and, middle school years as well?
I think, one of the things is, as parents, I mean, my math, part of the reason I'm a lawyer, my math ended at about third grade. I could not help my children with their math. And I know that math has changed a lot since I was in school, since even my children were in school, the way that they learn. And I think that as parents, it's okay for us to ask for help, and it's okay for us to empower our children to understand that it's okay to ask for help, that it is not a sign of weakness, that it is a sign of bravery to say to your teacher, to say to someone, I need help with this, I don't understand this. I think all too often, we kind of just continue down the path and think that, okay, at some point that light bulb's going to go off. But if there's that gap, and quite frankly, that's one of the biggest gaps that we are seeing right now. And I believe in large part it is because of COVID. It is because there was so much online learning at such a quick pace, and a lot of students, either didn't engage or didn't understand, but were afraid to ask questions. If you can encourage your child to ask questions, to not be afraid, because 9 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 students in the class don't understand either, but no one is brave enough to raise their hand and say, I don't understand what you're saying. So that's one thing. The second thing, I know kids have a long day, but I always try to instill in mine and try to instill in the students I work with that you have homework every day. Every day you should have homework. You should be going over your math. You should be reading something, not assigned reading. Read whatever you're interested in, read Smithsonian for kids, read National Geographic for kids, just read. But every night, just like you want to have time on, the computer, or you want to have time watching your favorite TV show, carve yourself out some time for something, that you're just going to continue to learn. Because one of the things I think that we've learned over time is the difference between our long term memory and our short term memory, and parking things in the long term and short term. So I think if we can help our children learn how to learn and learn how to love learning, um, I think that's a real gift we can give to them, because lifelong learners, that's what colleges are looking for. They're looking for that student in college who's going to want to come to class, who's going to raise their hand, who's going to challenge sometimes the thinking of their fellow students and even their professor, because that's how we all grow as humans, as we grow as a society, is we learn from each other.
Well, I think you bring up the most important point, but I think one that's so difficult. I think every parent would want their child to be a self motivated learner, to love learning. But I think most parents would say that their kids are not motivated enough. And I think a lot of parents would say that, you know what, my kids are lazy. So, how do we get past that? I mean, what are the tricks really, or the tips? How do you develop that love for learning and that self motivation?
I think it comes back to, and I don't want to sound like I'm a broken record, but I think it really comes back to, what are they passionate about? I found with my own children, when I was able to better discern what they were passionate about, I was better able to help them develop that love of learning, even if it was single tracked, even if it was, at this time, I mean, my son went through a period where he was, as a young child, obsessed with geography. And we owned every geography game that existed. We played geography games on weekends. He would play them on his computer. And I mean, it was like, oh, if I have to, play one more geography game. But it was what he was passionate about. And we did that. And then it transitioned into this phase where he was obsessed with presidents, and he wanted to learn, and we bought every book about every president. And again, I think that when we recognize, or help our children recognize, do they love horses? It's okay. From horses, they have a lot of things they can learn. Just reading about horses, going to visit a farm, maybe volunteering at a horse farm to feed them, to care for a horse. You know, there are different ways that we learn. It's not all with our nose in a book, although that makes me very happy. But if we can help them figure out what it is they like to do, even if it's something we don't first think of as being purely academic, it's not math necessarily, but if they love to cook, there's so much math involved in cooking. There's so much science involved in cooking. And I think if we invite them to explore those things that they're passionate about, and then feed that passion with the books, with the experiences, with the trips, it really opens their eyes to that love of learning. Maybe it's singular at first, but I think it grows over time, or maybe it transitions over time into different things.
Absolutely. So don't be afraid if your child has a passion in something that you feel is just not academic or useful, because you can really transfer those skills of, of learning, of getting passionate about something, getting really doing a deep dive. And as you say, it could later transfer to something else or grow into other things.
Right.
Well, I want,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but along that line, one of the very common things that I hear from parents, my child spends too much time on their phone. And I know that we're raising generations of students, starting. I've got great nieces and great nephews that are on iPads at 2 years old. And, some people will say, oh, that's so harmful. But it depends on what they're doing. And sometimes I'm saying to my middle and high schoolers, well, maybe you should look into computer science. Maybe you should look into
Yeah.
cybersecurity. Maybe it's okay that you want to spend a little bit of time, playing these computer games, but let's see how we can use that skill set, that hand eye coordination. Should you look at being a dentist? Should you look at being, a pilot? Or, how can we take what you already enjoy doing, flying that little plane with that joystick, and move that into a potential further passion or career path. So, again, if your child is obsessed with whatever that may be, Dora the Explorer, well, let's look at getting them to learn a foreign language at a young age. And now when they're watching Dora the Explorer, they're really learning too. Um, and look for those opportunities. I think, again, it's not always a matter of my child is not motivated. It's maybe we're not motivating them in the right area or the right way. And if we let them direct us, and trust, um, that they know what they like a little bit. And it doesn't mean they always have to like it. And it doesn't mean that they won't outgrow whatever we maybe despise them enjoying in their current state. Um, but feed that passion, help them see that everything that they're doing is an opportunity for them to learn, to grow, to maybe develop some skill set.
Absolutely, Renee. This has been so informative, so insightful, and you've given us so many concrete advice and tips. Do you have any parting words for our parents in terms of maybe some of the mistakes they should avoid or anything else that comes to mind?
So, one of the biggest mistakes, and you can learn from me, don't think that preparing your child to set the goal of going to college, of maybe going to a selective college, don't wait for high school to really start to have those conversations with your children. I'm not saying push your child to that, but if you go out of town and you take a family vacation, walk around a college campus. Let them see how exciting, that is. Kids out in the diag playing frisbee and, enjoying their college years, and let them, maybe at an early age see, this is something that a goal that I may set for myself down the road. I think, I made the mistake of thinking, okay, we don't have to start thinking about college till at least your junior year of high school. Dead wrong. There are so many things, again, going back to thinking about your schedule, thinking about developing this love of learning, this passion, this community service at a much younger age. Again, not necessarily for the college applications, but for developing that passion. Because to me, it all comes back to, don't encourage your child to build a resume. Encourage
Mm.
your child to develop a passion, and the resume will follow from that passion if you give them the opportunities to explore it in a multitude of different ways. And I think that's one of the big lessons that I learned, through my first one. And fortunately, she just was a little more of a self starter than, some other children. And she was already doing a lot of these things because she liked it. And I was fortunate in that way that, she turned out okay because she really had taken some of those steps on her own. But I understand that not every child is that motivated. And the other advice that I would give is to stay involved in their lives. I think that's, they want independence and we want them to have independence. But I think they also like to know that we've got their back, that we want to know what they're doing. We want to know what they're interested in. They don't always want to tell us, but that's where a long road trip is a fabulous idea, because you got to spend a lot of time together in the car, and just the opportunities open themselves for you to have discussions at a young age, to be talking about, the things that they enjoy and the struggles that they have. I think, one of the other things, and I don't want to end on a sad note, so you're going to have to ask me one parting question. But one of the things I've seen in the 10 years I've been doing this is a lot of students struggling with mental health issues, and not just since COVID. I think that there's been increased pressure on children, and maybe some of the devaluation of test scores will help with that. Well, the colleges hopefully looking at students in a more holistic approach, might, alleviate some of that for some students. But I think also just, being open with our children about that it's okay to fail, and that we're going to use that failure as a tool to move forward. We're not going to look back, we're going to look forward, and there's a soft landing place for you, so that when you get to college and you have those experiences, you know how to cope and you know how to do that. So I think as parents, I encourage you to pay close attention to that as well, even in our young students, and get them the help they need, and instill in them that it's okay to ask for help, whether that's at an academic level or a social or a mental health level.
Absolutely. I mean, mental health is such a concern for so many parents today. So, as you asked, on a happier note, I'll ask you, what has been some of the most maybe out of the box or peculiar or funny angle you've seen students apply to college with? Something that all of us tend to think that to apply to the highly competitive schools, you have to be a math Olympiad winner or something like that. So, what are some funny angles or unique angles you can have?
Well, I think I had one student, this was really an interesting situation, and he was in a highly competitive IB program, and his dad was a pilot. And he decided in his senior year of high school that he was going to leave the IB program. Gasp, everybody would be thinking, oh, he couldn't handle it. How is he going to handle college? But what he felt was this was his first opportunity, and maybe only opportunity, to see the world with his dad when he had no commitments. And I think the experiences that he had outside of the classroom were far more fulfilling and gave him a far more interesting story to tell than what he would have learned in the classroom. His senior year of high school. I thought that was kind of interesting. I've had students go the family live on a sailboat for a year and travel. Again, I'm not saying that that's the way to have your in, but I think again it just gets down to giving our children life experiences outside of the box that we think they all have to fit in. They don't all have to have perfect score, perfect GPA, have won these national competitions. There are those 6 or 7 different boxes that the colleges are looking to fill. And if we can help our child develop to their best of their ability, one or more of those, that's what we want the college to see in them. And I always like to say to the parents, if you could sit down and have a conversation with an admissions officer and say, this is why you should admit my child, what would those characteristics be? And whatever those are, help your child develop that. If it's my child's a great leader, my child is a great friend, my child is giving, we want that to come out in their story. It doesn't have to be my child is the best and my child is the brightest. It can be that they're a good human being. And boy, wouldn't all of our colleges and our world be a lot better if we viewed people as human beings first instead of a number?
Absolutely, Renee. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for your time, the insights you've shared that you've accumulated over the years as a college admission advisor, as a mom of 3 whose 3 children had incredible stories and incredible successes in terms of their college admissions and beyond, from what I know. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you another time.
Well, thank you. And thank you for what you do. What you do is so important. I wish I had known you. I wish I could have listened to you and your program when my children were growing up. I just think, again, it gets back to knowledge is power. And we need to share this knowledge with each other, because when we lift one child, we lift the world. And so thank you for what you do. It's such an important part of raising our children, is learning from each other, from our mistakes and from our successes. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos.